Memory keeping can be a great way to capture moments and little snapshots of life at any given time, but how do we actually do this in our journal? In this video, we're going to look at some of the questions you can ask yourself before you get started with memory keeping, what types of things you can include when memory keeping in your journal, and also some simple memory keeping layouts that are useful for any of the moments that you want to record. The first question to ask yourself is, do you actually want to do your memory keeping in a written format? Now, given the fact that you're watching this video, I'm going to assume you probably do. I just know that for me personally, I prefer to do mine in video form, like with vlogging, small little videos from my trips, and then just saving those videos to my computer for my future perusal. As said, assuming that you do want to keep this in a written format though, then it's good to consider before you get started how in particular you want to keep track of your memories in this kind of like paper-based, physical, written format. One of the questions you might want to ask is around the type of journaling you want to do. Do you want it to be very long form, kind of like paragraphs of text, or would you rather it be little brief snippets, or kind of what I've got here, which is just a bulleted list? I do this style whenever I do written memory keeping, mainly because I can just see all of my thoughts as individual little entries, rather than having to read through large bodies of text to get the overall vibe from any kind of memory. And also, I don't really like doing a lot of handwriting, which is also why I don't primarily do my memory keeping in a journal. Another consideration though is, do you want it to be more writing heavy or more kind of like ephemera or picture heavy? I've done kind of a combination in this journal, so sticking in things like flight tickets, little pamphlets from places that we've visited. You can also save things like packaging materials for things that you purchase, even acquire pieces of stationery at the places that you're visiting if your memory keeping is kind of like place-based. All of the ones that I have in here are based around travel, so heading to Melbourne or heading to Napier, so any flat pieces that I pick up in terms of ephemera could be stuck into this journal to keep track of the memories made in these places. Another question to ask yourself is, how simple or how involved do you want the layouts to be? For the most part, I keep my layouts fairly simple, especially considering most of the writing is just done in bulleted lists, with every so often putting in a piece of decoration that either is just nice to look at or something that specifically relates to the trip that I was taking. In some people's memory keeping journals though, they have things like little pockets that they can slip pieces into, whether that be pieces of ephemera, tickets, packaging materials. You can make flip out style things with pamphlets that you've collected, or I've even seen some example where people press wildflowers and stick that into their journal. It does very much depend on what you're trying to memory keep as to what kind of elements you might stick in, but you can make your layouts very junk journal-y, very scrapbooky, or a little bit more structured and simple like I like to do in my journal. For instance, this spread is really just splitting each of the pages into two sections, so the middle section for the piece of ephemera I'm sticking in, and then the sections along the side for the journaling. Another thing to ask yourself is, do you want to pre-decorate your layouts, or do you want to decorate as you go? I often do a combination of both, for instance sticking in things like washi tape, adding some color to pages before I go in and start adding my journaling, mainly so I don't have to take these kind of supplies with me to wherever I'm going that I'm making these memories. If you're not planning on doing your memory keeping after the fact, then having some pre-set up elements before you head off and go make your memories could be quite useful. In terms of which way you decide to go with that, my recommendation is to place in the hardest to work with elements first, or at least leave ample space for them. For instance, on this page here, I have gone and put some decoration in, but I've left ample space to add in anything else that might be a little bit more difficult to place after the fact. So if I had like a ticket stub or a photo that I wanted to include, I'd put those into the layout first, like after these decorative pieces, but before I go and add in any of my journaling, just to make sure that those other larger pieces, the photo, the ticket, whatever, actually fit in the page layout. Another important question to ask yourself though is, who is this journal actually for? If you're memory keeping for your future self, you're probably going to include some different information compared to journaling for somebody else. For instance, if you're making your memory journal as an heirloom that you're going to pass down to like your kids or another family member, what you include in the layouts will probably be a little bit different. For instance, this is a memory keeping book from my grandmother. She made this for me. She made one for each of her grandkids. So in making her little memory keeping layouts, she's made sure to include where things were based, who's in the picture, which is quite helpful because some of these pictures are quite old, so I don't necessarily know who's in the picture or recognize them straight away. Regardless of whether you're making the journal for somebody else or yourself, it's good to consider what kind of memorable moments you want to include. Notably, mine has mostly been travel journaling, so memories from my trips. But in terms of the journal that was made for me by my grandmother, this is more so about daily life, which I think is really exciting. I find that oftentimes we don't feel super compelled to record what's going on in our daily lives, but this can be really special to look back on for our loved ones. Seeing what we were like at different points in our lives, maybe before they got to know us, or possibly even before they were around, depending on who you're giving it to. In terms of what to actually include in your memory keeping, this is very much anything and everything goes. It is fully up to you, but some very important stuff to start with is probably the key information. This will be asking yourself the what, where, when, who, and why of this memory. Having that information for your future self or whoever you're giving this memory keeping piece to could be very useful. Just because we know at this moment who is in the pictures or what we were doing there or what was going on doesn't mean that future us is going to remember. So giving ourselves some context around that can be really useful. What I actually like to include are things like the weather. What were the high and low temperatures? Was it raining? Was it sunny? It just adds some context to the other memories that I'm recording. Like, why was it that we decided to go to the aquarium on a Wednesday rather than on the Saturday that we had originally planned? Outside of those key pieces of information though, in terms of the general journaling that comes with a memory keeping journal, this could be things related to the highlights and lowlights of the memory. Were there any kind of standout points, either positive or negative, that you want to capture? And what I find to be most important about memory keeping is recording my feelings surrounding this. I'm very good at kind of defaulting to the what of the happenings and not so much how they made me feel, what was most exciting, my kind of takeaways for that. This could also be about things that you learnt about the experience, either with regards to the experience itself or with regards to yourself. What did you learn about yourself in terms of your likes, dislikes, or any kind of elements surrounding that memorable moment? When we find memory keeping layouts online, most of them include stick-inables, that's what I'm going to call it, or effectively things that you stick into your journal. This can be things like photos, packaging from anything you've purchased. You can stick in tickets, pamphlets, stickers. My biggest recommendation here though is try to make it so it's not too bulky. There is something very nice about a kind of chonky looking memory journal that you've really decked out with a bunch of stick-inables, but we don't want to compromise the spine of the journal. Or not to the extent at least of the journal falling apart. It can also be good to note that when you're thinking about the materials you're using for your memory keeping, how long do you want to keep this journal for? If you want it to last a good long while, then we want to make sure that the materials we're using are acid-free, archival friendly, scrapbooking friendly, that kind of thing, because we don't want our memories to discolor or fade over time. Or at least we want to limit it as much as possible. One of the best parts about memory keeping journals though is the creativity aspect, and this is also something we can include when setting up our layouts. This can involve things like art, doodling, sketching, painting. I love looking at journals that people have made while they're away on travels and they've like painted the landscape and stuff like that. Of course, that style of memory keeping isn't for everyone, but it can be really beautiful to look back on. You can also bring creativity into the structural elements you use though. So not only just the layout design in general, have you gone more collage-y, is it kind of more simplistic, geometric, scaffolded? Or are you using things like Dutch doors, flip outs, and tip-ins? They can kind of add a little bit of an interactive element to your layouts, which is kind of fun. And even just playing around with different kind of textures, colors, patterns, all of these are ways that you can personalize your memory keeping and just make it a more fun and enjoyable creative experience. When it comes to the memory keeping layouts we see often online, a lot of them are very kind of collage-y, junk journal style, which is, don't get me wrong, gorgeous, but also can be kind of hard to emulate. There doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme and reason as to where things are placed. Notably, this is literally the only example I have of anything like that kind of page. I don't do a lot of that style myself. I prefer things that feel a little bit more structured. This is probably as unstructured as my layouts get. Typically, I prefer things that are more like bulleted list, individual headers for each of the days, which is definitely a very approachable style if you're just getting started and you want it to be more journaling heavy than ephemera or stick-inable heavy. If you are looking to stick things in though, another approachable layout can be the half and half. So that's where half of the layout is dedicated to the stick-inable stills or ephemera, and the other half of the layout is dedicated to your journaling. It doesn't have to be a perfect half, similar to what we have here. This ticket takes up more than half of the page, but this can be really great for comparison style memory keeping. For instance, something like a then and again layout, which is a very simplified version of memory keeping, just having some prompts in the middle and you respond to it at 2 different points in time. But as noted, you can use it more in the sense of having ephemera side and journaling side. Other styles of layouts you can do are the small summary style. So in this one, I just have a horizontal space for each of the days that we were taking this trip over, and then in those spaces I can summarize things that were going on. In this case, this was an itinerary, so like places we were going, things we were doing, also included the weather. But you can also include memory keeping related to things that you ate. So I used a similar style for our meals for the days of the trip. These kind of styles are very good for snippet overviews of your trip if you're doing memory keeping for a kind of longer period of time. But another approachable style for a similar type of memory keeping is a page per day, where you just fill it up first with any of the things you want to write, and then the space at the bottom is left open for any of the things you want to stick in. You could technically do it the other way as well, so stick in the things at the bottom and then see how much writing space you have left over. But another style that you can use is just based on a regular monthly calendar. This is especially good if you just want to do kind of daily memory keeping, have little snapshots of each day and what was going on. In this one, I've just taken the regular monthly calendar layout and then filled in each of the daily boxes with stuff that was happening. Every so often, nothing all that interesting happened. Nothing special happened today, normalness. Whereas other days, much more interesting things happened, like passing my restricted license test. I do hope that this goes to show that memory keeping doesn't just have to be that very kind of scrapbooky, decorative looking style that we do see a lot of online. Don't get me wrong, it is beautiful. I think that there's a great place on the internet for that. But for some of us, myself included, we find that collage-y style a little bit hard to imitate or emulate, so this can be just the more approachable, kind of structured or rigid version of that. Another possible style of memory keeping page though, if you have a piece of ephemera that's kind of larger, stick it smack bang in the middle of the page and then journal around the outside. Sure, it's not the most aesthetic looking page, but it holds a very important memory to me. I would love to know, how do you do memory keeping in your journal? Oftentimes, if I have something that's a memorable moment, I'll just add it to my daily log. I don't often set up dedicated layouts for memory keeping, because as said, I prefer my memory keeping to be video based. But if you were finding that most of your memory keeping was travel related, then the next video to check out would be this one on 30 different travel related layout ideas. This can be a great way to organize some of your memory keeping, get prepared for your travels, and make sure that you have an excellent trip. So click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.